At precisely 4 in the afternoon on July 4th, 2026, a routine marine distress call echoing from Horn Island permanently transformed a quiet local sandbank into an active federal crime scene. This single transmission marked the official vanishing of 18-year-old Nolan Wells, activating what is now a multi-agency federal investigation into a cluster of forensic evidence failures and silent jurisdictional gaps that local law enforcement initially refused to acknowledge. While local authorities rapidly classified the loss of Nolan Wells as a tragic aquatic event, the physical forensic evidence collected at the crime scene dictates an entirely different reality. To understand the fate of Nolan Wells, we must reconstruct the timeline with the same cold precision that federal behavioral analysts applied when they reopened this sealed case file 1 month ago. Horn Island is not a typical public recreation area. It is an exclusive maritime zone controlled by the region's most prominent families, a jurisdiction devoid of any functioning surveillance infrastructure and absent of any active patrol grid. When an elite athlete like Nolan Wells walks onto a crowded shoreline beside his closest companions, he does not simply evaporate into the tide. The accumulation of documented forensic discrepancies has now fully bypassed local jurisdiction and forced federal review of every decision made on July 4th, 2026. At exactly 3 o'clock, Trace Shepard reported seeing Nolan Wells near the water, engaged in conversation with 19-year-old Katie McCormick. That is the last confirmed, documented sighting of Nolan Wells on solid ground. Minutes later, the official narrative completely collapsed. Trace Shepard claimed the vessel designated the Triton suffered catastrophic mechanical failure. Trace Shepard stated he ordered a mandatory shoreline evacuation. Trace Shepard maintained Nolan Wells firmly refused to board. Yet Katie McCormick, under sworn deposition at the county courthouse on July 9, 2026, testified Nolan Wells explicitly stated his immediate intention to return to the Triton and depart. Both sworn statements from Trace Shepard and Katie McCormick cannot survive inside the same factual record. But it is what did not happen next that exposes the operation. No immediate physical shoreline search. No deployed emergency flares. No urgent radio broadcasts to nearby vessels. No witnesses stepping forward from the adjacent sandbanks. The official narrative demands we believe Nolan Wells voluntarily remained behind on a desolate barrier island stripped of communication infrastructure. Yet the marine GPS log obtained by federal analysts on July 22, 2026, exposes a substantial 30-minute discrepancy between that initial 4 o'clock emergency call and the actual coordinates logged when the Triton departed the Horn Island shoreline. What truly transpired during those 30 unaccounted minutes represents the central evidentiary void of this entire federal investigation, and the exact void active Reddit forensic threads are racing to map. While search teams scanned the open water for Nolan Wells, a systematic digital extraction was unfolding silently on the mainland. Trace Shepard and his associates had transported the personal cellular device of Nolan Wells back to shore aboard a second unmarked vessel that has never been added to the official incident manifest. A simple behavioral analysis of anyone holding that device of Nolan Wells reveals one obvious expectation. A person fleeing a tragic, unexpected accident immediately contacts emergency services. They surrender the device. They cooperate fully. They do not initiate a multi-layered forensic data wipe. Within 7 minutes of that specific device pinging a mainland cell tower in Biloxi at 4:04 p.m., private text messages, encrypted signal threads, location logs, and deleted media archives linked directly to Nolan Wells were permanently erased from the internal storage. Perhaps the device of Nolan Wells malfunctioned in salt water. Perhaps the storage corrupted from ambient humidity. Perhaps the battery simply failed. But when accepting the innocent explanation requires you to ignore a methodical, time-stamped deletion sequence executed inside a narrow 30-minute window, it stops being the most likely answer. This digital scrubbing demonstrates calculated intent, executed specifically to protect certain individuals long before the family of Nolan Wells was ever notified of his absence at 6:17 p.m. that same evening. To divert public attention from this compromised device, a strategic decoy was deployed across 3 major social platforms at 11:42 p.m. on July 4th. A low-resolution video surfaced showing a physical altercation allegedly involving Nolan Wells. National outlets aggressively consumed the footage. But just as public scrutiny peaked at 2:15 a.m. on July 5th, Trace Shepard publicly admitted in a written statement that he was the individual featured in the viral clip. That footage was a calculated misdirection, designed entirely to occupy public attention, while the genuine physical evidence of Nolan Wells was quietly degrading inside a state-controlled pathology facility 2 hours away. On the morning of July 6th at 7:03 a.m., authorities recovered the remains of Nolan Wells from a tidal outflow zone. The state medical examiner rushed an initial autopsy in under 5 hours, ruling the outcome consistent with an accidental aquatic event. The factual reality surfaced only after the family of Nolan Wells secured an independent forensic pathologist, Dr. Roger Mitchell, Jr., to perform a secondary examination on July 11th. His findings directly contradicted the state autopsy of Nolan Wells. Dr. Roger Mitchell, Jr. formally documented that the airway, the trachea, and the critical hyoid bone of Nolan Wells were entirely absent from the documented chain of custody. Rather than returning these biological samples after standard forensic pathology testing, the state permanently retained the internal throat structure of Nolan Wells under heavily restricted access at a secure, climate-controlled vault. In forensic practice, withholding these specific structures represents a serious indicator of compromised procedure. The hyoid bone is the definitive anatomical feature required to evaluate any instance of manual compression applied to a living person. By retaining this exact structure, the state has made it scientifically impossible for any independent expert to verify the precise mechanism of the fatal event involving Nolan Wells. Despite this severe jurisdictional limitation, Dr. Roger Mitchell, Jr. identified deep subdermal bruising concentrated precisely at the base of the skull of Nolan Wells. No fractured bones, no compromised outer skin, only deep tissue hemorrhaging, indicating an unexplained high-impact force applied minutes before the fatal event. The application of such precise, localized force, leaving zero surface marks while critical internal evidence remains under state custody, suggests operational knowledge completely inconsistent with any chance aquatic outcome. This procedural deviation perfectly mirrors the irregular jurisdictional maneuvers documented behind the scenes between July 7th and July 28th. Records now prove that the official public tip line, established by the county sheriff on July 5th to gather anonymous digital media from Horn Island beachgoers, was secretly rerouted 4 days later. It bypassed the homicide division of the Nolan Wells case entirely. The incoming data stream was redirected directly into the private digital mailbox of local Judge Ashley Cole, a judicial figure embedded in the same documented social circles as the families of Trace Shepard and Katie McCormick. Every digital submission regarding Nolan Wells was intercepted by Judge Ashley Cole before the lead investigators were even briefed on its existence. Which brings us to the final unredacted piece of digital evidence, the raw audio recovered from that 4 o'clock distress transmission. When certified forensic audio technicians isolated the background frequencies between 4 o'clock 2 seconds and 4 o'clock 11 seconds, they discovered faint, layered human voices. Multiple individuals were actively arguing over a mobile device mere seconds before the dispatcher connected to the call. This spectral forensic evidence confirms Nolan Wells was not left alone on the sand of Horn Island. He was surrounded by multiple unidentified voices during his final documented moments on the shoreline of Horn Island, a finding now circulating across active investigative threads as the strongest indication that the initial narrative of Trace Shepard is structurally impossible. The loss of Nolan Wells is not a simple aquatic accident. It is the visible surface of a coordinated operation functioning under unprecedented jurisdictional immunity. Every missing text message of Nolan Wells, every withheld forensic specimen of Nolan Wells, every rerouted phone call regarding Nolan Wells. These elements form an undeniable pattern of containment, now sealed inside an upcoming federal grand jury file. The legal proceedings are rapidly approaching a sealed federal grand jury convening in September of 2026, where civilian jurors will finally unseal these restricted documents. Now, based on that calculated deletion of the cellular device of Nolan Wells, what specific encrypted signal threads, undisclosed location logs, or hidden media archives do you believe were so damaging that they required a deliberate forensic erasure before the authorities were even contacted? Tell me in the comments right now, because the encrypted inbox of Nolan Wells is exactly what Judge Ashley Cole is hoping no one ever unlocks.